Be strong.
After asking a pretty menacing question, Richter just stands there like a cocky bastard waiting for a response from Leon and Lunan. Our boy stares at the troublemaker in animal print clothing and immediately concludes that the guy is very obvious about his intention to kill them. However, he remains unfazed and glares at Richter without showing any form of fear, because he has lived his entire past life as an assassin, and this little confrontation is nothing to him. Leon reaches for his sword, suggesting that he's ready for a clash of blades, and when Richter sees this, he's amused that the young blonde swordsman can withstand his threats. At this point, our boy is still glaring at him, so the troublemaker realizes that this blonde swordsman is no kid at all. Richter remains extremely overconfident even as Leon reaches for his sword. Our boy prepares to charge at this guy, feeling certain that he'll be able to kill him if he attacks him from behind. He already knows that he can't beat the guy with the way he is right now if he fights him head-on from the front. Even though he knows this very well, for some reason, he just can't get himself to back down from the fight. Our boy finally unsheathes his sword, and with a very fearless look on his face, he challenges Richter to take his sword and come at him. The animal print guy almost seems afraid for Leon because he claims that our boy will get killed if he actually attacks him with his sword. However, our boy doesn't seem to care, because he already knows that it's common sense for the weak to be killed by stronger men. At this point, Richter becomes even more certain that Leon isn't a kid because that's not the kind of thing a kid would say. The guy admits that he wants to fight even less now that he's seen the kind of person Leon is, because he feels that it would be a shame to kill the blonde swordsman there in the woods. However, our hero still wants to fight, so he reminds Richter that a martial artist doesn't choose where he dies. This statement amazes the man even more, so he asks Leon if he's sure that he's really a kid. He's even starting to feel that our boy has a collection of famous quotes or something. Of course, the knight in training just ignores him, so Richter reveals that there's another reason why he doesn't want to kill him. He suddenly claims that someone called Vicious Wind has been watching them the whole time, and this leaves our boy very puzzled. All of a sudden, Richter leaps into the air and onto a cliff, and tells Leon that it would have been fun if he was part of the North and South Alliance. He then asks the young swordsman what his name is, so the trainee introduces himself to the guy. Richter just smiles when he hears Leon Ziegart say his name. He finds it pretty interesting and just keeps smiling at our boy. Richter admits that he would like to one day hear about Leon from across Mount Terrakin and Rabel River, and after saying this, he leaps out of the scene. Leon seems surprised to see that the guy is gone, but then he shrugs off the shock and tells Lunan that they should also leave, and she agrees immediately. But then, just when he's about to start walking away, she calls out to him suddenly. Our boy turns around to ask her what's up, and then she randomly asks him if she was good. She wants to know if she did a good job during their little rescue mission, and seems so nervous when she asks this question, so nervously like a high school girl talking to her crush, and Leon is pretty surprised by this. However, the look of confusion on his face quickly turns into a warm smile as he assures her that she was actually the best. Upon hearing this, the white-haired girl is so glad and relieved that she just smiles shyly in response. Anyway, it's at this point that our boy's short but long first mission comes to an end, because he finally gets to take the young hostages he and Lunan freed out of the snowy forest. After that, they catch up with the others outside the forest, but this time they arrive with the head of the Snow Tiger Claw Bandits chief in a sack. As you can imagine, the other trainees are shocked to see Leon holding the head in a bag, so they begin to ask the duo how they even managed such a thing. Besides that, Burin and Martha are particularly upset that they lost to him once again. As for the red-haired instructor Lemmer, he just comforts the other students for not performing as well as our boy did. To cheer them up, he gargers them around and seems to be giving them some advice, but then what was supposed to be a pep talk ends up becoming story time, because the elf gets carried away when he starts telling them about how great his first mission went for him. Seeing that someone else was talking about himself, Wrath didn't miss the opportunity to brag about himself too. According to the blue guy, the elf's story isn't even impressive because he claims that he froze the entire castle during his first battle. Our boy ends up being in the middle of two talkative people bragging about their past, so it almost makes his ears bleed. Unfortunately, the children that they rescued have lost their parents and are now orphans, so the Sleon family decides to take them in as their own. It seems to be a pretty good idea because the kids like the arrangement since they already like Lunan. After returning from the mission, Lunan and our boy are summoned to the Patriarch, where they are but overwhelmed by the whole thing. There, they're awarded bronze medals for their accomplishments. Leon is even surprised when he receives praise from the Patriarch himself. But the most surprising thing was the fact that the Patriarch gave back the two-tone flower. The nobleman even claims that our boy can keep it despite the flower being a rare miracle medicine. Well, Leon is pretty honored by all of this, feeling that the series of events have all been nice and good. The scene changes, and one night, we see the hero stumbling upon an old friend on his way somewhere. As he opens the door, he's surprised to see his green-haired classmate, Dorian, so he asks the guy what he's doing there. The kid excitedly greets him in response, feeling delighted that the young master has finally returned home. After all the pleasantries, he explains that the madam asks him to stop by and tell her what happened after the mission was complete. He nervously reveals this to Leon, leaving the blonde swordsman rather perplexed by the statement. A wave of horror washes over Leon's face because he hopes that the guy didn't tell the madam everything he knows about the mission. Unfortunately, that's exactly what happened because the guy literally told her everything about Leon's touching story. Our boy just stares at the idiot in disbelief because the guy has no idea what he's just done by telling her. While he's still trying to wrap his head around the whole thing, his mother rushes out the door as if she knew they were just talking about her. She looks so worried and relieved at the same time when she sees that he's come back home. Our boy sees her and the maid running toward him, and he already knows that Sylvia will be mad if she knows that he stepped up to kill bandits. So, he quickly raises his arms up in surrender to explain himself, but before he can even put together a complete sentence, something unexpected happens. Sylvia immediately embraces him in a tight hug that takes him off guard. Bro is so confused by this, and then she holds his face and tells him that he did a great job, which is even more shocking. He almost can't believe what's going on, and probably thinks that he's dreaming right now. Sylvia instantly sees the confusion on his face, so she asks him why he thought that she would be mad if she found out. The whole time, she's smiling at him, proving that she's proud of him. But our boy just explains that he was afraid because she always tells him to be careful. Leon remembers that the reason the first patriarch wielded his sword was to protect the weak. He heard that he always reached out his hand to those in need. As such, the Zeegarts continue to carry out his will to protect the weak. Sylvia reveals that his dream was to be a swordsman like the first patriarch, so she's surprised that Leon would think that she would be mad at him for saving hostages. On the contrary, she's actually very proud of him, and she makes him aware of this. Sylvia puts her hands on his shoulders and lets him know. The maid chimes in, talking about how proud they were when they heard the story. The other maid also talks about how she has to go to the main residence tomorrow, just so that she can brag about all of it. As for Sylvia, she's just glad that her son has grown to be such a good man. She hugs him again, but our boy honestly can't understand her at this point. He's pretty confused because he feels like her emotions are all so complicated. Even though she seems cool and glad about the whole thing, he just still feels that the green-haired busybody named Dorian is a bastard. However, when he looks back to glare at the idiot, he realizes that the kid has already fled the scene. Wrath comes out at this point and reveals that the coward ran away a long time ago. Leon is stunned to see this, and pretty dumbfounded. But even though he's pissed at his loose-lipped friend, he admits that it's not a bad night after all. Later that night, we see Lunan smiling in bed as she touches the wooden squirrel. She recalls the time she spent in the snowy woods with Leon and how he told her that she doesn't need to hide in the shadows anymore. With this in mind, she makes a promise to herself, saying that she will tell him what's on her mind the next time she sees him. With a smile on her face, she vows to tell Leon thank you no matter what. Elsewhere that night, we see the red-haired elf chilling on a hammock outside. It turns out that this instructor was there during the confrontation between Rain and Richter. He was hiding behind a tree and heard when the young trainee challenged the stranger to take out his sword and come at him. As the memory plays back in Lemmer's head, a smile appears on his face. He feels that it's been so long since he's seen what he saw in the Patriarch in someone else. So, it makes him feel like the seed for a new king has begun to sprout. The scene changes and we're taken to the Robert family's main residence building. Inside the mansion, a white-haired man is busy writing something in his office, but then he stops all of a sudden. He stares at the paper with a look of worry laced all over his face. He keeps staring at the blood stain on the paper grows even bigger, and that is when we see the nasty cut on his hand. He's a bit perplexed by the fact that the wound still hasn't closed. And it's really worrisome because he feels that it's already been 17 years since that day that he sustained the injury. He remembers the day he was cut by a guy using a curved knife during a fight. This white-haired noble has continuously tried out different high-quality miracle medicines since that day, but to no avail. He has even hired skilled physicians and renowned priests to help him with the solution, but none of them has been able to erase his wound. He raises his hand to look at the cut one more time, and thinks about how the stubborn wound neither heals nor worsens. It just remains like a fresh cut even though it's already been 17 years since the incident. It looks like the same day he got the injury, and it's almost like the wound wants him to remember that day. At this point, he begins to wonder if there's some dead spirit asking him to remember that day, and just then, we actually see someone appear in front of him. Unfortunately, this man doesn't even care if there's a spirit, because he doesn't look back on the past. He has more important things to think about, and as he places his hand on the book he's been writing in, he claims that the only thing that matters is the little time left until his lifelong wish will come true. Elsewhere, windows pop up with different messages for our boy. The first one says that the bitter cold curse has been lifted and that he has achieved a 3-star 1000 flame technique. He also receives a 3-star bitter cold aura, along with 3-star legendary senses. 3-star flame attribute resistance is also included in the list of rewards as well as achieving the entry to sword expert. However, this isn't all because Leon also has all his stats including aura manipulation greatly increased. His sword proficiency and footwork technique have also even increased. Upon seeing all of this, our boy is glad that he's finally reached the expert realm. Even though it's still at entry level, it doesn't take away the joy of this new achievement. Leon knows that he's worked hard to reach this point, but his grumpy blue companion doesn't really seem to agree with him. Wrath pops out all of a sudden and calls the achievements ridiculous, because even a swordmaster is a mere insect to him. This is why Wrath is so disappointed that Leon is proud of himself for becoming an expert. However, our boy is unfazed by the floating bubble's mean words. He reminds Wrath that it's rare for a 15-year-old to become an expert. After all, even if Wrath were to look all over the continent, he wouldn't see anyone Leon's age who's already an expert. Unfortunately, the grumpy blue spirit doesn't even count Leon's statement as a valid point. He's surprised that our boy would even bring up age. In fact, he's pissed that Leon even talked about age as a factor, because he feels that only idiots consider age on the battlefield. He bluntly tells Leon that age doesn't matter, and makes it very clear that weakness is weakness regardless. In response, our boy accepts the point. He knows that nobody goes easy on you on the battlefield just because you're young. He agrees with Wrath, and the blue spirit is quite surprised to hear him say this. But then, he goes on to call Leon a fool, telling him that he can't even put a scratch on someone's finger with the way he is currently. In fact, Wrath feels that Leon won't even be able to touch his fingernail with his current strength level. Not surprisingly, our boy just agrees with him again. He doesn't even protest the fact, so Wrath is pretty pissed to see that he's smiling. That's when the blonde swordsman reveals that it's because he's happy. In his past life, he was nowhere near the level he has gotten to now. So, everything that Wrath has been saying makes him believe that his grumpy companion also thinks that he's grown in some way. Of course, Wrath is puzzled when he hears this, because he's literally been yapping about how Leon isn't good enough yet. The crazy statement annoys him so much that he flips out and yells at the trainee. He's shocked that Leon would think he would ever praise a human for any reason. Not to talk of a human as young and inexperienced as the blonde swordsman. At this point, our boy can sense the rage coming from Wrath, so he asks the spirit why he's getting mad all of a sudden. He leaves the blue floating menace stunned again when he claims that he heard his voice shaking. As such, he concludes that he must be right if Wrath's voice was shaking. He believes that he's been with the blue guy long enough to know what he's thinking, at least in situations like this. Of course, he just snaps at our boy again, telling Leon that he deserves more than death for thinking that he's a human who can see through him. Wrath just keeps throwing a tantrum, yelling and screaming at Leon. But the young trainee couldn't care less about the angry floating spirit. He bluntly tells the spirit that his rage is nothing, warning Wrath that he might even get eaten up by the young swordsman if he doesn't regain his natural power soon. However, Wrath just hits back at our boy, claiming that he gets reminded of the good old days just by listening to him. Of course, this one gets Leon mad, but the spirit just ignores him and goes on to start talking about his past life. Wrath is about to start talking about how there were demons who came to challenge him back when he was in the demon realm, but our boy unceremoniously cuts him off by saying that he wants to go for a stretch. Leon takes off before Wrath can say anything in response, and even when the spirit follows him, telling him to stop and asking him to listen, our boy just ignores him and keeps jogging away. The scene changes once again, and the next thing we see is the instructor clapping his hands together to get the attention of everyone around him. He tells them to stop what they're doing and listen to him. And once he's got the attention of the trainees, he informs them that their training for the day is over. He commends them for doing a good job, but while most of them are relieved to hear this, people like Byrne, who have made it their life's goal to be overachievers, aren't satisfied yet. He immediately calls for Lemur's attention and suggests that they should go past their usual time since they arrived 20 minutes late for training. Unfortunately for the forward student, the instructor just assures him that they'll make up for the lost time tomorrow because the training for the day is already enough. Lemur says this and then scurries on out of the scene, leaving Byrne thinking that he's just an irresponsible elf. With the instructor now out of the picture, Leon just suggests that they finish up, and then tells the people in charge for the day to begin with the cleanup. Elsewhere, we see Dorian checking his locker for something, and just as he closes the door, Martha appears out of the shadows like a ghost. She's staring at him with a mean glare like a zombie who hasn't had any human brains to eat for a long time. She remains dead silent and he has no idea that she's even standing there. Well, that's until she taps him on the shoulder like a serial killer. Dorian almost has a heart attack when she grabs him and just screams in horror. Martha asks him if cleaning with her is so terrible to the point that he'd want to run away from there. The terrified kid starts to tremble and then tells her that it's an honor to clean with her. However, Martha is already pretty pissed off because she's already busy enough with training. So, she snaps at all the others in charge of cleaning, asking them what they're all loitering about for. As you can imagine, they're all terrified of her, so they scamper out to do the chores before she ends up ripping their heads off. Leon observes the little scene in front of him and realizes that Martha is indeed only calm when she's with him. Lemur chimes in, claiming that she's unchanged and that she only switches up when she's around our boy. Leon is surprised that the instructor has been standing behind him, so he turns around to talk to the elf because he thought that the guy had run away before. Lemur admits it, but then claims that he came back because of something that he forgot earlier. The other trainees around hear this, and they're quite puzzled as to what the instructor could have forgotten. They're already curious, but then Lemur suddenly calls for their attention again, so they line up in front of him to listen to what he has to say. With everyone eagerly waiting, he reveals that he has something else to announce and claims that it's really important too. They're all anxious to find out what it is this time around, so the elf starts to feel a little too important by delaying them a bit to build the suspense. He eventually tells them that there's a second mission for all of them, which leaves them surprised because it's a pretty big deal. They all stand there in silence, waiting for the cheeky elf to finish his announcement, but then he just bursts into laughter and apologizes to them. They realize that he's already done with the announcement and are quite stunned that he would forget something as important as another mission. Burin and Dorian are particularly bewildered when they hear this while Leon recalls how it's already been half a year since the first mission. This new one took a lot longer to come around than he expected, so he wonders if there are fewer duties for the Zeegarts to handle now compared to back in his past life. Apparently, there have been orc invasions in the southern part of the Zeegart territory, so now their mission is to eliminate the orcs that are threatening the villagers. They're also assigned to protect the people of the village. So, in other words, their mission is the protection of a village and a monster raid, so they're all pretty excited about the news. They're all pumped for the orc raid, feeling that this is the kind of mission that they've been waiting for because they will finally get to test out their swordsmanship skills and all that. Lemmer suddenly interrupts the chit-chat when he sees how excited the newbies are about the mission. That's when he breaks it to them that the instructors won't be accompanying them on this mission. They'll be the only ones going to the village, so they'll need to work together to accomplish this mission. The students are a lot less excited when they hear this new development, and then Burin asks what would happen to them if they come across a monster they can't face. In response, Lemmer reveals that it's up to them to handle such a situation, stating that they would basically need to give up if it's a mission that they can't handle. He explains that this is why the leader's ability to accurately judge a situation is important. A leader needs to be able to judge what the best response in any situation is, and Dorian asks if it will be bad for them to run away from the mission. Lemmer admits that it normally is, but also explains that it depends on the situation, claiming that it would be praiseworthy if they escape after coming across one of the 5 demons. Dorian is just glad to hear that running away won't get him in trouble, but Burin is left speechless by his cowardice. Just then, the instructor informs them that they'll leave for the mission a day after tomorrow, which bewilders the students greatly.